Welcome back to the deep dive. We are jumping right in today because the file we're opening is, honestly, it's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah. It definitely is.
But before we touch the third rail here, I do have a quick request. If you value these deep dives, where we don't shy away from the difficult or suppressed topics, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel right now.
Right. We really need to fight the algorithm to get this information out.
Exactly. Your interaction is the only way we do that. And the algorithm is definitely not going to like today's topic.
Not at all.
No. So today we're conducting what the author calls an autopsy of modern society. We're looking at a very controversial and incisive new ebook. It's titled Feminist Hell, STDs, Abortion's the Pill, Antidepressants, Divorce, and Unhappiness.
Quite the title.
It is. It's by Conrad Riker. And look, if you are a man who feels like the modern world is increasingly hostile to your very existence, Riker wrote this specifically for you.
He absolutely did. Riker frames this book not as a critique of a living system, but as a literal coroner's report.
Right.
He's arguing that the social contract has been completely broken, the institutions have been captured, and the feminist experiment has basically died on the operating table.
It is a really heavy read, but it is fascinating. And just, if you want to verify the data we're about to cover, and there is a mountain of data in here.
So much data.
Yeah, the ebook is available right now on Amazon, Kindle, and Google Playbooks. I actually highly recommend you grab a copy to follow along. Riker brings the receipts, and honestly, we can only cover so much in one deep dive.
So the central thesis here is that feminism promised liberation, but it actually delivered two specific things. Misery for women in the form of medication and loneliness, and total disenfranchisement for men.
Yeah, so we're going to walk through the collapse of the female psyche, the financial incentives of the divorce industry, the Marxist capture of our institutions, and finally what he calls the male exodus.
Let's start with that first pillar, the broken promise.
Right. We've been told for 50 years that having it all was the ultimate key to female happiness. And Riker looks at the data and just says objection.
He calls it the paradox of liberation. The whole narrative was that if you remove traditional constraints like motherhood, marriage, dependency on the man,
that women would flourish.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Riker points to this massive longitudinal study out of Denmark.
This isn't a small sample size either.
No, it involved over 1 million women. And the study found a direct causal link between hormonal contraception and depression.
Over 1 million women. That is huge.
Yeah.
And the book points out that this isn't just about feeling a little down sometimes. The stats on pharmaceutical intervention are just staggering.
They really are.
Riker notes that antidepressant use among women is currently sitting at 17.7%, which is roughly double the rate for men.
Double. Riker's argument here is that we're essentially medicating an entire gender just to help them cope with their freedom.
Wow.
He paints this very bleak picture of a woman who is told to prioritize the corporate ladder over her biology. So she chases the career, she delays having a family, and then suddenly at 35, she finds herself alone in a cubicle relying on SSRIs just to get through the day.
Because the void left by rejecting family life is basically being filled with pharmaceuticals.
Precisely.
And speaking of pharmaceuticals, we have to drill down into the chapter on the pill. Riker uses a term that I think is going to stop a lot of readers in their tracks. He calls it chemical castration.
Yes.
Now that is very aggressive language. What is the biological argument he's making there?
It is aggressive, but he backs it up with endocrinology. The pill works by suppressing ovulation. It essentially tricks the body into thinking it's already pregnant or in a non-fertile state.
Right.
Riker argues that this doesn't just stop a baby from forming it. It fundamentally alters the female operating system. It flattens the libido. It changes mood regulation. And this is the really wild part. It alters mate selection.
This is the science regarding the MHC, right? The major histocompatibility complex.
That's the one. There is significant research suggesting that women naturally select mates with different immune systems to ensure healthy offspring.
It's pheromonal.
Exactly, it's pheromonal. But when a woman is on the pill, that mechanism is jammed. Riker argues that women on the pill often choose men who are genetically similar to them, or men who are less masculine because their hormonal radar is completely broken.
So the implication is that we have millions of marriages formed under a chemical influence, basically.
Yes.
And if the woman comes off the pill later to have kids, she might suddenly wake up and find she's not even attracted to her husband anymore.
That is precisely the bait and switch scenario Riker describes, and he traces this all the way back to the history of the pill's creation.
John Rock, right?
Yeah, John Rock, one of the creators, he didn't envision this as a permanent lifestyle accessory. He saw it as a short-term medical tool for severe infertility issues.
But today it's just handed out everywhere.
Handed out like candy at campus health centers. He cites this student at UCLA who had been on synthetic hormones for 5 years with absolutely zero counseling on the psychological side effects.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So we have this massive mental health crisis. But Riker also goes hard on the physical consequences of the free love culture. The stat that really jumped out at me from the book was that 33% of women now carry an STD.
It's a terrifying number, and Riker links this to the concept of the sexual marketplace, which we'll get into a bit later.
Right.
But fundamentally, he argues that by removing the gatekeeper function of female sexuality, by making sex cheap and easily available, we haven't created empowerment. We've created a public health crisis.
And he connects this directly to the abortion industry. And I want to be really clear for the listener here. Riker isn't arguing this from a religious or moral perspective. He's looking at it strictly as an industry.
Correct. He describes abortion not as healthcare, but as a routine backup plan for a culture that flat out refuses to acknowledge biology.
Yeah, he points to the saturation of clinics in places like Los Angeles County, right?
Right. 12 new clinics opening in a single year in LA. To Riker, this looks like a calculated business model capitalizing on female distress and promiscuity.
All the money.
Always. He argues that big tech and the medical establishment are profiting off this dependency, while men are left with absolutely no say in the fate of their potential children.
That lack of a say is actually the perfect pivot to the second major section of the book, the divorce industry. Riker refers to family court as a feminist casino.
The feminist casino. The metaphor being that the house always wins, and in this case, the house is the state and the female plaintiff.
Right. And he leans heavily on the statistic that 70% of first divorces are filed by women.
And if you look at college-educated demographics, that number spikes to nearly 90%.
90%. Now, the mainstream narrative usually tells us that this is because men are behaving badly, but Riker completely flips that script. He attributes this spike to the structure of the law itself, specifically no-fault divorce.
Exactly. Before no fault, you needed actual grounds. Adultery, abuse, abandonment, you needed a reason to break the contract. Now, a marriage can be dissolved just because one party feels unfulfilled or they need space. Riker argues this actively incentivizes women to leave because the state rewards the departure. He calls it cash for kids.
Which brings us to the story of Kevin. The book uses Kevin as an archetype of the modern divorced male.
Kevin's story is visceral. He's a guy who did everything the traditional script asked of him. He worked overtime, he supported his wife while she went back to school, he was an active present father.
And then she files for divorce.
Citing irreconcilable differences, which essentially meant boredom. And the court awards her the house primary custody and 70% of his retirement assets.
70%. And Kevin now runs a blog called Beta Betrayed. It sounds extreme, but Riker argues this is a feature of the system, not a bug.
It leads directly into what he calls the deadbeat dad myth. Society loves to paint this picture of the deadbeat father who runs off and just refuses to pay for his kids.
But the data tells a different story.
It does. He cites the Pew Charitable Trusts, which found that 80% of unpaid child support debt comes from orders that demand more than 50% of a man's gross income.
Let's just pause and look at the math there for a second. If the court takes 50% of your gross income before taxes,
Right.
after taxes you're left with what? Maybe 20 or 30% of your actual paycheck to live on.
Exactly. You literally cannot pay rent and buy food on that math. It is mathematically impossible, so the man inevitably falls behind.
And then the state revokes his driver's license.
Which means he can't get to work, which means he loses his job and then he goes to jail. Riker describes this as a modern debtor's prison system, explicitly designed to crush men who lack the resources to fight back.
It's a terrifying feedback loop.
Yeah.
And Riker argues this anti-male bias isn't just confined to the courtroom either. It has metastasized into the workplace and into education. He calls this institutional capture.
This is the war on competence. Riker argues that our major institutions, HR departments, universities, corporate boards, have been completely captured by a Marxist feminist ideology that actively punishes male traits.
Traits like stoicism, competitiveness, aggression, risk-taking.
The very things that historically built civilizations are now labeled toxic.
He cites the American Psychological Association's 2019 guidelines here.
Yes, where they essentially declared traditional masculinity to be psychologically harmful.
Wow.
Riker argues this is a deliberate attempt to pathologize maleness itself. If you act like a traditional man, the medical establishment literally says you're sick.
The book gives some pretty high-profile examples of what happens when you challenge this orthodoxy, too. We have Brett Weinstein at Evergreen State College and James Damore at Google.
The Damore case is particularly instructive for Riker's argument regarding the corporate world. Damore didn't write some unhinged, hate-filled manifesto.
No, he wrote an internal memo.
A memo suggesting that biological differences in interest, specifically systemizing versus empathizing, might explain why there are fewer women in software engineering. And he used scientific data to back it up.
And for citing peer-reviewed data, he was fired.
Fired and globally branded a bigot. Riker uses this to show that truth is no longer a defense in these institutions. It creates a massive culture of fear. There is a Stanford study mentioned in the book stating that 84% of faculty now self-censor their views.
84%.
If the people teaching the next generation are afraid to speak the truth. Riker asks, are we even educating people anymore? Or are we just indoctrinating them?
He also talks about the sheer economic cost of this diversity push. We aren't just hurting feelings here, we're hurting the bottom line. He brings up the case of Norway.
Right, the diversity tax. Norway legally mandated 50% female representation on corporate boards. Riker cites data showing this resulted in a 12% drop in profitability for those firms.
12% is massive for a corporation.
It's huge. And he attributes this to risk aversion. The board meetings turned into consensus-seeking therapy sessions rather than decisive, aggressive business strategy sessions. He argues that by prioritizing gender quotas over actual competence, we are just making our economies weaker.
So we've covered the courts, the jobs, and the schools. Now let's talk about the dating market, because this is where the book gets into the sexual marketplace and introduces the cat lady pipeline.
This section relies heavily on the concept of hypergamy. In evolutionary biology, hypergamy is the female instinct to marry up, to find a partner with higher status or more resources.
Right.
Riker argues that dating apps have hyper-accelerated this natural instinct into a complete delusion. He cites the 80-20 rule, or in some markets the 90-10 rule, which suggests that on apps like Tinder, the vast majority of women are competing for the top tiny percentage of men.
Effectively meaning average men, guys with steady jobs and good values, are practically invisible.
They get zero matches. Riker blames social media influencers like Luxury Lover for normalizing this idea that our relationship is just a transaction for designer bags and free trips to Dubai.
It totally distorts the expectations.
Making average women actually believe they are entitled to a top 1% man.
And when that top 1% man inevitably doesn't settle down with them.
That leads to what he calls the barren elite. Riker tells the story of Emily R. She's a Yale graduate, a partner at McKinsey. She did everything the feminist career path told her to do.
The girl boss route.
Exactly. She froze her eggs at 34 to focus on the corporate grind. But now she's 45, she's single, and the book implies she is deeply unhappy. She priced herself completely out of the market.
Right, because men of her status are looking for younger women to start families with. They aren't looking for a 45-year-old CEO who wants to debate politics at dinner.
Exactly. And that brings us to the cats. I know it sounds like an internet meme, but Riker treats it as a very serious sociological phenomenon.
He really does. He argues that pets are being used as surrogate children. He even brings up Toxoplasmosis gondii.
The cat parasite.
Yeah, the parasite found in cat litter. There is actual science suggesting this parasite can influence human behavior, potentially increasing neuroticism.
It's wild. Riker uses it to paint this grim picture. Women who spent their 20s mocking stay-at-home moms ending up completely alone whispering to felines because they waited too long to start a family.
So faced with all of this, the rigged courts, the hostile workplaces, the impossible dating standards, what is the male response? Riker says they're checking out. The male exodus.
It's the logical application of game theory. If the game is rigged, the only winning move is to not play. He profiles David in Montana. David was a highly successful software engineer making 6 figures.
And he just walked away?
He quit, bought land, and vanished into the woods. No phone, no Wi-Fi, no women. He told Riker, I didn't leave society. Society left me.
Wow. And it's not just extreme survivalists in cabins either. The data shows a massive drop in men even using dating apps. Male usage on Tinder dropped 38% between 2017 and 2022.
38% is a huge demographic shift.
It's enormous.
And that ties into the rise of the manosphere. Riker documents the explosive growth of Reddit and Telegram groups dedicated to male issues. We're talking 200 to 300% growth.
And these aren't just complaint forums.
No, they are strategy sessions. They discuss things like the no contact rule.
Explain that for the listener who might not have heard that term used in this context.
Sure. No contact is usually advice for getting over a bad breakup. But here, it's an entire lifestyle. It means zero emotional or financial entanglement with women to avoid false accusations or financial ruin in family court.
It's a risk management strategy.
Precisely. Riker argues men are realizing that a single bad date or a bad marriage can end their career or cost them their freedom. So they are simply choosing solitude or exclusively male camaraderie.
He mentions places like Brotopia Ranch and Iron Haven. These sound like they're trying to build a completely parallel society.
In a way, they are. They're creating physical and digital spaces where masculinity is actually celebrated rather than pathologized. They are realizing that if the institutions are captured, they just have to build their own.
So where does this leave us? The book is called Feminist Hell, but does Riker offer a way out? Or is it just a chronicle of the decline?
His solution is definitely controversial, but it's completely consistent with his thesis. He calls for a full restoration of patriarchy. Now, we need to be clear on his definition here. Riker argues that patriarchy isn't about oppression. He views it as a necessary biological structure for a stable society.
He uses the Hasidic Jewish community in Brooklyn as a case study for this.
Yes.
Why them specifically?
Because of the results. They have a 98% marriage rate, extremely low divorce, high birth rates, and incredibly strong community cohesion. Riker argues that their structure, which has distinct gender roles, courtship instead of hookups and strong male leadership, actually works.
Right.
He contrasts their thriving community with the sheer loneliness and medication of the liberated secular world.
So his call to action is for men to essentially stop apologizing, to lead, protect, and provide, but strictly on their own terms.
Precisely. He views this not just as a political disagreement, but as a literal battle for the survival of civilization. Riker suggests that the woke culture is biologically self-terminating.
Because it doesn't reproduce.
Exactly, it doesn't reproduce. Therefore, the men who opt out today and build their own strong traditional communities will be the ones left standing to inherit the future.
That is a very provocative thought for you to consider. That opting out isn't a retreat at all, but a long-term siege strategy.
It recontextualizes the whole movement. If the current system is crashing, you don't try to fix it. You get to the lifeboats and wait for the dust to settle.
We've covered a massive amount of ground here today, but honestly, we've really only scratched the surface of the data and the stories in Feminist Hell. Riker describes this book as a weapon in the culture war.
It really is.
If you want the full arsenal, the charts, the court cases, the raw data, you really need to read the full text.
Absolutely. If you found this discussion eye-opening, the book goes so much deeper into the actual mechanics of these laws and studies.
So here is your call to action. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now and buy Feminist Hell. But the conversation doesn't stop there. Riker mentions that his real-time analysis of the news applying this exact lens to current events happens over on his Substack.
That's where he breaks down the day-to-day shifts and offers what he calls real solutions.
So go over to Substack and follow @ConradRiker. And finally, a quick reminder for you, our listeners. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hard truths, please like this video and subscribe to our channel right now.
And if you read the book, go leave a 5-star review. Riker explicitly asks for that to help fight the algorithm and get this message out to the men who really need to hear it.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.